So welcome everyone. I'm Barbara Rossing, M.Div alum from 1981, and I'm on the Alumni Board. Yeah, but it has a different name, doesn't it? Anyway, so on behalf of the Alumni Board, we're so happy to be able to award 4 Distinguished Alumni Awards tomorrow at the luncheon, and hope you're all coming to that. But we have this wonderful practice of being able to hear from some of the award recipients. Sadly, only 2 of whom could be here today. Horace Ballard will receive the Lux et Veritas Award tomorrow, and that's the award given for demonstrated excellence in applying the compassion of Christ to the diverse needs of the wider church, so come to that lunch. David Good is being awarded the Alumni Award for Distinction in Congregational Ministry, and he unfortunately died of acute leukemia after he had already been voted on by the board, but sadly before he was able to come. So I never knew him, but learning about his ministry, some of you are nodding, it's wonderful. He was a pastor at First Congregational Church of Ode, Lyme, Connecticut. He did, just read the bios on the webpage, it's amazing. He did amazing ministries with Lakota, many trips to the Holy Land, started this Tree of Life. I can't even say enough, a wonderful, wonderful ministry. But we're fortunate to have 2 of the award recipients with us today. The Reverend Dr. Melanie Morrison, 1978 M.Div, so was here with me, and she's receiving the William Sloan Coffin Award for Peace and Justice, which is given to an alum for their contributions to the work of peace and reconciliation, and she'll talk with us about that work. And then also Reverend Dr. Shelly Rambo from 19... Oh, you're not a reverend? Well, you write like... the Gospel of John, okay. Anyway, wonderful. Okay. All right, I already goofed up. Sorry. The story of my life here. She's getting the Distinguished Theological Education Award for her work as professor at Boston University, and we'll hear about that. It's absolutely fascinating. This award recognizes an alum whose scholarship, teaching, or leadership contributes to vocational formation for ministry in the best traditions of YDS. So both of them have published wonderful works. Shelly has at least 2 books. One that I use in my class is called Resurrecting Wounds, Living in the Aftermath of Trauma, and then one more on the Gospel of John, Spirit and Trauma, A Theology of Remaining, and challenges the central Christian claim that life arises out of death, so we'll need to hear about that. And then Melanie Morrison has brought 2 of her books here. This wonderful one, Murder on Shades Mountain, the legal lynching of Willie Peterson and the struggle for justice in Jim Crow Birmingham. And then this one, Letters from Old Screamer Mountain. So please come and look at the books afterwards, and we'll be hearing more about them. So I'll just throw questions to our panelists. And let's start with Shelly Rambo, if you may. You write about wound work, that the Gospels themselves call us to do wound work, and you cite the story of Jesus appearing to the disciples with his wounds. So what has compelled you to address this topic, and what's your work on trauma, and if you could tell us more about that?
Hi, everyone. Hello.
We have to turn it on. There, try that, otherwise
Hi.
you'll use this one.
Oh, wow. I'm feeling very nostalgic, so I'm going to do a little backup to how I got into the theological work that I did. So I'm feeling nostalgic because Yale Divinity School was very formative for me. I did my M.Div at Princeton Theological Seminary, and I was doing different kind of work there, personal work, figuring out my relationship with the church. I was, of course, very academically interested, but I was doing other things. So YDS was a theologically formative place. I came here to decide, was I going to go into ministry, which for somebody, a girl raised in a non-ordaining evangelical tradition, was probably more scary to my parents than if I went on for advanced theological education. So I came here thinking This was a pivotal time for me, and I love that Bill Gettler's in the room because he and Maria and the Presbyterian Church here were formative for me in providing a faith community while I was studying. The study of trauma as it intersects with Christian theology really began here, and Serene Jones could probably tell this story as well as I could. Yale University was a big hub for interdisciplinary studies in trauma. You have the Fortunoff archives of Holocaust testimonies. You had really pivotal work happening in intergenerational trauma at the Yale Psychiatric Institute with Dory Laub. It was really at the end of the 1990s was really a pivotal moment for thinking about trauma across disciplines. So I failed to add that the Yale English department was very instrumental in that study as well. You had Jeffrey Hartman, who himself had deep experience in the Holocaust and was teaching in the English department. So all of this was available to me when I came to Yale Divinity School, and I did a directed study with Serene Jones on all of this stuff. We read kind of across what was happening, how did the study of trauma from neurobiology to literature to history to philosophy, how did that impact how we read theology? And that basic question had just took off for me. I was really focused as a literature student on themes of suffering in especially Russian literature. And so I brought this concern into theology, and this is really the birth of my theological trajectory. I thought I would just study that a little bit, and 20 years later, I think the world being as it is, the study of trauma became even more important. Very few theologians were kind of working at this intersection, and I now am kind of the old school in doing this. I was in there pretty early to think about how does Christian theology narrate experiences of death remaining in life? That's really the central question, that the past doesn't stay in the past, the body remembers trauma, and wounds don't simply go away. This is my hermeneutic. This is how I read the Bible. The past is not in the past. The body holds the trauma, body remembers. And then this wound work really, I think, is the call to think about when wounds, when they surface, and if they do, because that's the question of trauma, right? If so much remains invisible, unknown, unseen, and if it surfaces, the question is who will witness it? This, to me, is a collective call of so obvious now. When I was first studying it, I was like, how do I figure out this trauma thing? And we had, of course, the rich trajectory of Jürgen Moltmann's rethinking the cross in light of trauma. This wasn't new, but it certainly shifted my focus to think maybe the cross is not the primary site to think about a theology of trauma, but maybe it is the after the cross, these after events. So that's why I turned to that famous Thomas. It's typically known as the Doubting Thomas scene. I don't read it as doubt as being his central concern. It really is a scene in which wounds surface. The risen Christ comes back with wounds and says, plunge your hand into the pleura, which is like the pleural cavity. It's very, very visceral. And I really rethink that invitation as wounds are what we don't want to see. That wound work is difficult work. It involves telling truths about past histories. And So I really do most of my work, all of my books work on biblical texts. It comes from my evangelical background. I really think it does. That to me is a primary text. Did I answer the question?
Yes,
I think
that's
wounds,
fair.
yeah, so I just started with my nostalgia about YDS. I mean, it was so formative. I mean, I feel so moved to receive this award because I was like, these were 2 years, because I stretched an S.T.M. out, because I stretched the S.T.M. And I really found my voice as a young theologian. And the collection of people who helped me do that were all here.
Well, see, now we've made you a reverend. Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you. We'll come back to that. So, Reverend Dr. Melanie Morrison, I think you are a reverend.
You are.
You are receiving the William Sloane Coffin Award. Get nostalgic here. Who was he to you? What does this mean to get this award, and how does it connect with your passions in your work currently and over these past 30 years?
Good morning.
We have to turn this one on too.
Oh, that's right.
Here.
Up. It has to go up. I think, try now.
Good morning.
No, you better take this one. Here.
Okay.
Trade me here.
Here we go. Good morning. Yes, I do want to say that I thank you for being here. I'm honored and delighted to be here. And when Dean Sterling called me and told me I would be receiving the William Sloane Coffin Award, I'm not being hyperbolic to say chills went through my body, and I might have said something like, "Oh, you must be kidding." I don't know. And then he graciously, told me, "Oh no, this is why, and this is why," and I have to say, I have not been to, I shouldn't begin with this confession, but I'm going to be honest. I have not been to many convocations since I graduated in 1978, but 2 years into ministry, I came early to the convocation in 1980 and stood at, the Marquand Chapel door so I could be on the front row of the balcony to look down on William Sloane Coffin, who was giving 4 lectures on preaching in the 80s. And I was a pastor in a small town, largely, bipartisan Republican, and wrestling with how to, and not, while I was there, well, we won't go into that. What I want to say is that William Sloane Coffin, I wanted to be there because I had heard him preach before. I'd heard him here in New Haven, heard him at Riverside, and he did not disappoint in those lectures. As a matter of fact, I have been quoting those lectures for 44 years, especially what he said in the 4th lectures, when he kind of, he let down his guard. He just talked about what ministers need to hear from him. And if you can find these, I had to scrupulously look for them in the Yale Divinity School online archives. They are worth listening to. So as a young preacher and a young writer, his riveting storytelling, his social justice, relentless social justice commitment, his work as a white ally involved in the Black freedom movement, his work for disarmament, and of course his protest and civil disobedience related to Vietnam. It was just an enormous honor to receive an award that is in memory of him. I want to say that there's another William Sloane Coffin awardee that has influenced my work. When I graduated from college and before coming to seminary, I lived at Koinonia Farm in southwest Georgia for 3.5 years. And while there, in the, more than 50 years ago, I heard there also a great storyteller. Just a moment, I want to find my notes about this. Well, Clarence Jordan, of course, the founder of Koinonia, had a huge impact on me. But also Will Campbell came and spent time with us at Koinonia.
And he was a recipient of this
And he was a recipient in 2003. That's what I was looking for. At the age of 79, he received the William Sloan Coffin Award. So I want to also say, Yale Divinity School was important for me in my budding passion for writing. I never had a writing course until Susan Thomas, classmate, convinced Peter Hawkins to teach a course on writing. And generously, he opened his living room to a circle of us who gathered, I think, weekly to write, share what we were writing. And of course, he himself was passionate about storytelling. And that set me on the course of storytelling, which has been present in my preaching, in my social justice activism, in my facilitation as a racial justice educator. So have I responded to your first question?
Wonderfully, yeah.
Yes? Okay. Anything else you want to hear?
Well, I mean, my job is just to get the two of you talking about.
Okay. May I tell a story about?
Yes, do a story.
Okay.
Yes, great.
I would, in terms of the work of racial justice is my deepest calling, the vocation I am most passionate about. And that work has, as a racial justice facilitator, educator, writer, has been intimately related to and interwoven with other callings as a United Church of Christ pastor, co-director of a nonprofit organization, founder and director of the Levin Center, a retreat and study center in Michigan, and an adjunct seminary professor. And I'd like to share one story about one of the life-changing experiences that brought me to the work of racial justice, how that came to the fore. It occurred in 1990. I was a 41-year-old United Church of Christ minister who had served 2 churches in Michigan and another church in the Netherlands before co-founding Levin, like the stuff that makes bread rise, Levin, a nonprofit organization with my mentor and mother, Eleanor Morrison. We worked together for 17 years. Launched in 1987, Levin provided education, resources, and training in the areas of feminism, spiritual development, and sexual justice. Now, in the 1970s, I want to tell you that my mother had designed and taught the first courses ever taught on human sexuality at Michigan State University. And she wrote 3 books about teaching human sexuality to undergraduates before being ordained 2 years before me at the age of 55 to ministry in the United Church of Christ. She was a skilled and brilliant designer of experiential group process, and I wanted to work with her as her apprentice, learning her skills firsthand. Lansing, Michigan was our base, and we created a space for grassroots feminist reflection, study, and dialogue that explored the wisdom and vitality of spiritualities rooted in a passion for justice. We also traveled the country speaking to, consulting with, nonprofit, educational, and religious organizations about homophobia and heterosexism. We were a mother-daughter team, an out lesbian daughter and a fierce mother who was a heterosexual ally. It was good and needed work in the late 80s into the 90s, with women and LGBT people facing unrelenting discrimination, but our work had gaping holes because the resources and training we provided as two white women often failed to center the lives and experiences, wisdom, and resources of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, other women of color. 3 years after starting Levin, Lynette Stallworth, she's given me permission to tell this story, an African-American colleague and friend who was a United Methodist chaplain at Wayne State University in Detroit, invited me to design and co-facilitate an 8-month Levin seminar for Black and white women called Difficult Conversations. Lynette envisioned this seminar as a way of bringing Black and white women together to examine how systemic racism and the history of white supremacy had impacted our lives as Black and white women in radically different ways. I was delighted, a bit surprised, but very honored that Lynette asked me to design and co-facilitate this seminar with her. I knew I had much to learn, but I did not know how much I had to learn. For example, when we started envisioning this seminar, I listened and, we talked, we exchanged ideas, and then because I was one of the directors of Levin, I drew up a brochure. More like a flyer to announce difficult. Now, I had the wisdom not to send this out before sharing it with Lynette, and this was, this was 1990. I had to send it by mail. Remember that? Yeah, I sent it by mail, and she sent it back to me with words crossed out, red pen circled letters, words circled, things in the margin, and a sticky note on it that said, "This is an excellent flyer, Melanie, if you just want white women to come to the seminar. But if you want Black as well as white women to come to the seminar, it has to be wholly rewritten." Wow. Well, so we worked on that, and we continued to think about doing the seminar, about designing the seminar. And then graciously, Lynette said to me, Melanie, I've come to realize it would be morally indefensible if you and I were to lead an 8-month seminar with Black and white women, asking them to dive deep and share vulnerably about places, things, experiences that you and I have not done with each other. So let's take a year and do that with each other before. We'll postpone this a year. There's much I could say about that year. It absolutely changed my life. And when we did do the seminar, I still had so much to learn, as is true yet today. But it was a magnificent experience. So we decided to do it again. But only white women registered the second time around, not because it got bad reviews, but because we heard from Black women, we're just tired. We're tired. What's in it for us? Bringing our experience, why we don't need a seminar about racism we confront, we live it every day. So I said, okay, Lynette, well, maybe we could do it another time. And she said, where are you going? I said, what do you mean? She said, you have a group of white women registered. And I said, oh, will you do that with? No, you find another white person, maybe your mother, to do that with you. Because actually, Melanie, you know, we don't have to be in the room. What do you all do when black women? How are you confronting each other? How are you holding each other accountable? Racism is really a white problem. It's time you all do your own work. This is a long story, thank you. I just want to say that that inspired us, Eleanor Morrison and me, to launch something we did for 26 years, which was a 8-month, actually 6 full days of called Doing Our Own Work, an anti-racism seminar for white people, which was a supplement to the most important work which brings us together, not a substitute for that multiracial work. Thank you for the long story. I may tell a long story.
I don't know. Yes, this is working now. So, thank you. So now I want to shift to asking about the Bible, which is my field, my favorite. But anyway, you both are spirit-inspiring people. Shelly's written about John's Gospel and the idea of abiding or remaining in John's Gospel. And Melanie, you're a person of spirit who's taught me so much through I remember going to demonstrations, singing, working at the Women's Center and all kinds of things. So if I may ask, what biblical or spiritual texts inspire your work, and how does that connect to us today, if you both be willing to say? Let's start with Shelly.
Yeah. Okay, so my favorite texts are the ones that I'm working on. So I want to say that I'm working on I'm trying to finish a new book. I have a full draft. So for a writer, that feels fantastic. I still don't know what it's about. So that's the challenge. In 2020, I was really burnt out as an educator, but also I was working on developing a new curriculum for the school. I have a lot of experience in theological education. And I just spent the summer reading Howard Thurman.
At Boston University.
At Boston University, I thought, this is shameful that I have never read much of Howard Thurman beyond Jesus and the Disinherited. So Thurman was, as I like to remind people, a lifelong higher education chaplain. People think of him as a great preacher, but he really spent most of his time in universities, working with young people, and made that his career. So I've taken a turn in my theological attention to the work of chaplaincy. It's not that surprising given that I work on issues of trauma. And so I co-edited a book with Wendy Cadge on chaplaincy and spiritual care in the 21st century, which I'm really pleased is now being used as a textbook in chaplaincy courses and in CPE. So that has really been where my world has been. So reading Howard Thurman and really thinking about chaplaincy across different sectors has been really important to me. The chapter that I'm working on now is working on Howard Thurman's trip to Africa. So this was a trip that he took in 1963. This was after his kind of tenure at Boston University. He was kind of moving into what's called the wider ministry, retirement, but he couldn't really retire. I like to remind my institution that Howard Thurman found Boston University extremely difficult. He's heralded as a great figure of Boston University, and he was honestly quite depressed at BU. I share that too. I think there's some institutional history that makes that institution a really difficult place. But it was the only time that Thurman really was in a predominantly white institution. I mean, he had just come from San Francisco, and he had worked, really had this exciting experiment of the Fellowship Church. And he really discerned whether to come to BU. He didn't want to come. He got the invitation. There was a lot of back and forth with President Chase. BU is a good place for you. I don't think it will be. And I take that really seriously, that he took that trip to Africa after he left a very difficult, exhausting job, and he rarely was personally disclosive, but that was 1963, if you know your history. It was a really turbulent summer, and he has this very brief part of his journal to Africa. He was not a journal keeper. In fact, his autobiography is rather dry. Like, it's kind of like this happened and this happened. It's not very emotive. Other scholars say that, so I can critique him on that one too. But he has this incredible mystical passage when he first glimpses the coast of Africa. And so I'm working on that as somebody also who is inspired by Peter Hawkins. I'm a literature person, and so I hit upon this, it's like 400 words. It's not even that long. And he asks this question that I think is a life question for him. He says, and it's a chaplaincy question, it's a human question, it's a trauma question. How does the human spirit accommodate itself to desolation? I'm going to repeat it. How does the human spirit accommodate itself to desolation? That to me is the question that Thurman, both personal, professional, was really working through. And it wasn't until after that trip he comes back and he writes Luminous Darkness, which is one of his most direct works, kind of analyzing segregation. So I'm really in that 450 words of, it's a question that he asked the question, and then he asks it to the ancestors. He says, how does the spirit accommodate itself to desolation? How did you, right? So there's a direct address to, oh fathers, how did you? So that's inspiring me. I think that's a question for our time of how does the human spirit, I mean, you can say it in post-traumatic terms, how does the spirit grow under crushing, despairing, I mean, desolation is a word. So I think Thurman was well, he was ahead of his time on some of the deeply, on the spirituality of social change. Thurman's as timely as ever in terms of, I was like, he could be writing last week. But those 450 words, I'm just chewing on them. I'm trying to write about them. I think that's it.
Wow,
Yeah.
Thank you. And how about you, Melanie Morrison? What biblical or spiritual texts or persons inspire your work?
There are two texts that I believe so succinctly summarize and witness to the core spiritual truth found in both Testaments, that love and justice are inseparable. Inseparable. We hear it in Micah 6:8. What does God require of you? Only this, to act justly, love tenderly, and walk humbly with your God. And of course, when Jesus is asked to give the summary of the law and the prophets, to love the Lord your God with heart, mind, and soul, love your neighbor as yourself. To love God and other human beings, we must work for justice. Love and justice Love and justice complete each other. Certainly something that William Sloane Coffin brought home just about any time he preached. Love without justice can be sentimental and anemic. Justice without love can be harsh, even cruel. And I also draw strength, spiritual strength, from non-biblical texts I consider sacred. Beloved by Toni Morrison. The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. Anything, poetic or essay written by Adrienne Rich. And I hold them always in dialogue.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
So you both work on trauma of various kinds and intergenerational, the way it comes to us. So I'd love to ask both of you to speak a little bit more of that. Shelly, I'm fascinated with your work on Holy Saturday, I guess, because I just got back from a trip to Greece and Turkey, where we see the imagery in the Eastern Church of the resurrection. It's after the harrowing of hell, where Jesus comes out of the grave with Adam and Eve and everybody. So what can I ask you about Holy Saturday and what that says to trauma, the space between Good Friday and Easter? You've written you think people jump too much to that. But whatever more you want to say, and then Melanie, I want to follow up with you about the storytelling and trauma too.
You want me to talk about
Yeah.
Holy Saturday?
Uh-huh.
Okay, Holy Saturday. This was my first book. I had originally said that trauma helped me shift from thinking exclusively about a theology of the cross to thinking kind of about what comes after. If we know that something in trauma, that something of death, something of that harm remains, right? Unintegrated suffering, that's like trauma. Then how do we think about the move that Christians make between crucifixion and resurrection? And I'm not the first to make this critique. I mean, Cornel West, others, Walter Brueggemann even, that there's just a brief pause before we get to the good news, right? There's death and then there's triumphant Christian life. And often that's a very smoothed over, too soon, too quick, that many people who experience trauma, they don't experience life like that. That was just so obvious to me that the testimonies of people's lives doesn't have that arc. And so Holy Saturday, really, I recover it through Catholic theologian Hans von Balthasar, who rejected the harrowing of hell vision and identified Holy Saturday, or the descent into hell, as a second death, right? The death on the cross, and then Jesus descended to be dead with the dead. There's not activity down there. There's not, the saving work. There's a kind of second death that happens, and that really was inspired, Hans von Balthasar, by a mystic who he was in close relationship with, Adrienne von Speyer. So as a feminist theologian, I was like, oh, no, Adrienne von Speyer. Another woman inspiring a male theologian. And that, he insisted that her visions of Holy Saturday be attended to theologically, right? That he founded a publishing house. He wanted her visions and works to be published, but he really felt like then Holy Saturday, or the descent into hell, becomes this very compelling Trinitarian vision of a kind of depth of forsakenness between the Father and the Son. And what remains is this tiny, faint spark of the Spirit, not triumphant Spirit, but a kind of, he called it a weary drop of love that remains in hell. to me, I was like, oh, weary drop of love, not gushing, flowing water of life. And for me, that was really an important pneumatology that comes out of Holy Saturday. So all my works have really focused on the spirit. It's not heavily Christological. It's really thinking about what does it mean that the spirit remains, that the wounds don't go away, and now I'm really tracking the spirituality of Thurman and other mystics. So that's the thread, I think, that Holy Saturday revealed a kind of truth about human survival and trauma. And it didn't try to get to the good news too soon, too fast, too quick. It paused. Some people say I get people stuck in Holy Saturday. And I'm like, I'm willing to linger longer there for the sake of testifying to the trauma. But the pneumatology really has been key for me, is if we think about not only the Holy Spirit, but spirituality, spirit across religious traditions. I'm thinking about chaplaincy. I'm thinking of, interfaith chaplaincy and things like that. So Holy Saturday was an important theological locus for me. I think that's it.
Wow, great. I'm thinking of Dorothy Zola's book on mysticism and resistance, that one of her thickest ones, because both of you hold together this mystical and social justice resistance trajectory. So, Melanie, in this book, what happened in Birmingham more than a century ago, how is it intergenerationally still part of who you are, we are? Why do we, what's the trauma that carries through? And just say more about why you're doing these stories as part of your work, if you're willing.
No, I can talk, the danger is I can talk for 14 days, about this. But, so my father, Truman Morrison, was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. And the son of a rather wealthy businessman who wanted him to take over the family business, but he felt called to ministry and the work of racial justice as a young man.
In the 1920s, right?
He was born in 1918.
Okay.
This is a book about events that happened in Birmingham in the early 30s, when a man named Willie Peterson was falsely accused, arrested, almost lynched by 1,500 people who gathered that night at the jail after an attack that did occur on 3 white women on Shades Mountain in Birmingham. Willie Peterson did not. The one woman survived that attack, 2 died, and the survivor, after 6 weeks of the largest manhunt in the history of Jefferson County, there were 250 armed white vigilantes were set loose to raid black homes, any black man leaving Birmingham by foot, car, bus, or train could be arrested. Many were. And 6 weeks later, she saw a man named Willie Peterson on the street. She couldn't even see his face. I believe she probably cracked under the pressure, and she said, "That's the man." Okay. I heard this story growing up from my father because it was very significant in his life, and it's too long a story to tell you about how he knew about this in his teenage years, but he became convinced that Willie Peterson was not guilty of this crime. Willie Peterson went through 2 trials and was convicted of the death of those 2 women, was to be executed. But the story my father told was very compelling, and it was a time as a teenager he began to break with, at least question, the racial apartheid in which he was being raised. But he became convinced, living in that apartheid, that the man who was spearheading the effort to free Willie Peterson was a Presbyterian minister named Henry Edmonds, who was my father's mentor and hero, the person who inspired him to go into the ministry. I heard about this story, and it became very important to me. I was 13 years old when To Kill a Mockingbird was published. And I merged those two, my father's story and that, because there's, similarity that the people who exercise all the agency, and unfortunately, in To Kill a Mockingbird are white people, and so my father believing that the pastor, well, years later, I read an article about this murder. I had seen nothing ever printed about it. And there were things that, yes, that rhymed with the story my father told, but there were also discrepancies. Largely that he did not know that actually it was not Henry Edmonds who led the movement to free Willie Peterson. It was the NAACP in the 1930s. And Charles Hamilton Houston, who was the chief litigant, he was dean of the law school at Howard. He took many trips in the 30s to investigate this case. It was a black-led movement, not a white-led movement, but not much had been written about this. Because this story changed my father's life, changed my life, and because I felt that Willie Peterson, who was not executed, but he died in Kilby Prison, with the headline in the Birmingham News, "Assailant, Slayer, Dies, June 13, 1940. I felt compelled to research and write his story. And the story of this black-led movement, because when we hear, in the sort of mainline press and so forth, hear about the civil rights movement in Birmingham, it's often focused, understandably, Bull Connors, resistance, the boycotts, and the children's marches, and Dr. King coming in, joining Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth in Birmingham to bring an end to the segregation. But this history, of course, went before that history, as there was much before the 1930s. So I spent 8 years making numerous trips to Birmingham to investigate this and write Willie Peterson's story.
Wow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wow.
I want to say that I am profoundly moved by what you said, Shelly, about trauma, that death that stays in the present. And when it surfaces, who will witness it? I, for the past 5 years, have been doing research and writing about my enslaving ancestors in Montevallo, Alabama, half an hour or so south of Birmingham. The former plantation home where my father's grandmother was born in 1867 sits. It's the most central and the oldest house on the campus of the University of Montevallo. Montevallo is a wonderful liberal arts college. And if you were to type King House, it's called King House. My ancestors were kings and Shortridges. You learn that it's a haunted house. It sure is haunted. I have come to believe I've made 10 trips now to Montevallo in the last 5 years, working with students, faculty, staff, and community members to witness the history that has not sufficiently been told of that land, of who worked that land, who was removed before my ancestors swept in 1817, the Muskogee Creek people. And I'm haunted. Yeah. I'm haunted. I am asking over these 5 years, what does it mean that I'm a descendant of enslavers? That's not an easy question, but I know it matters. I know it matters. And I want to be engaged in some way in acts of repair, working with those in Montevallo who are unearthing suppressed histories and telling fuller, truer narratives about the history of enslavement, indigenous dispossession, enslavement, and the legacies of slavery, and ever present yet today. So, and I just say, I'm not sure, when I think about my white ancestors, I think about intergenerational violence, intergenerational legacies of white supremacy, intergenerational legacies as a descendant. I don't think I'd use the word trauma for them, but I would use the word soul splitting.
Wow, I gotta say, you both work on souls too. This is.
I think we're talking intergenerational soul splitting that also needs to be witnessed, truth told, and healed.
Wow. So I got the 5-minute signal about 4 minutes ago from my boss, but thank you so much.
I would love to respond, but
Can you
I'm
respond?
gonna
No,
keep
do. Shelly, why don't you respond?
2 minutes of response.
Let's get, and then we'll give you the
Okay,
last word.
so I read Melanie's piece about your family and the haunting. And in trauma studies, there's quite a bit of interest in thinking about if the past is not in the past and the past returns. Like in Toni Morrison's book, there's a figure of ghosts that the past comes back in order to insist that work be done. So there's a kind of ethical, in trauma studies at its best, it has a kind of insistence on witness and ethics at the heart of it.
Yes.
And that's challenging because if the past comes forward but doesn't quite look like the past, how do you heal it? So there is something I think to recover about our traditions. Many of our traditions do not retain the concept of the Holy Ghost, but holy haunting of that. This is in Avery Gordon's work that says there's a good haunting, a haunting that comes back to say the past needs to be integrated into the present. And then the question for us is what practices of of witness, how are we telling truths that would be easier to just kind of shove below the surface? But that's not healing, right? That's not, I don't think, the vision of healing. So this is where the haunting is a big yes in terms of, and let me tell you, when I start talking about ghosts and haunting in my classrooms, students wake up. Because I think this is a question of how do you think about the presencing of the past and the fact that wounds don't simply go away. So I do think there's something to recover there about that John 20 scene that is the scene in which he breathes into them a Holy Spirit. Not the Holy Spirit, a Holy Spirit. So there's a kind of holy haunting happening in John 20 that I think directly connects to the past needs to be addressed.
Wow. We could obviously carry this wonderful intersections of conversation. We do have chapel at 11:30 today, though, so I want to formally end, but not without saying I have this quote from the magazine we did when I was here in 1977, Eschatology Today, all's well that ends.
Oh, nice.
But I want to say our two recipients will be around these next 2 days, so feel free to talk more with either Shelly or Melanie, get the books, and keep the conversation going. Thank you so much to both of you, and congratulations. Okay.